What's up, everybody? Kevin Allen here, aka the Fantasy Football Geek from the DFS Army, and I am back and excited to introduce the all-new and improved Domination Station DFS Army Optimizer for MLB. So this has been a long time in the making, and basically what we've done is taken our MLB stacking functionality to the next level. I'm super excited to introduce this. This is actually my second video because after the first one, we put in a few fixes, cleaned up some math errors, and now this tool is ready to rock. So let's get a quick rundown of how everything works. So you're looking at the Domination Station screen right here. Obviously, first thing you do is choose your site, Fanduel or Draftkings. You're going to choose your sport. We're going to choose MLB. And we're going to choose our slate, which for the purpose of this demo is going to be the main slate. All right, you can see all of the teams that are playing that night. We have team totals, game totals, spreads, over-unders, all the good stuff. Really briefly, just the basics of how the optimizer works. If you ever want to just remove a game, hey, we have in the DFS Army our weatherman, Mark. And sometimes they'll say, this game has a 60% chance of delay, and, we're following it. Let's say a game is going to be delayed. Just shut down that game. You just click right there. You can pull all the players from that game right out of the pool. So that's a pretty cool feature. Really easy to do it. You can remove a couple games from the pool, whatever you want. So that's what this screen is for. Secondarily, what I use this screen for a lot of the time is to try to identify teams that are supposed to score a lot of points. So, we're looking at the favorites. We're looking at, if I'm looking for teams to stack, I'm looking at the Texans tonight. I'm looking at Minnesota, Colorado, St. Louis, Toronto, Chicago. We want the teams that are favored to score more. It's part of our stack. So we'll get into that in a minute. Next, of course, you have your filters. If in case you want to look at the player pool, you have all these different filters. Let's turn that off for now so you can see how that works. You can filter through the different positions as you're adjusting the various parameters for each player. We already know about that. You can filter by salary range. So if you want to just remove cheap, don't do that. But that's more of a function we use for different sports. But it's there. Fantasy points range. Let's say we want to remove all the really low projected players from the pool. We can move that around. Let's not do that. I do want to note that we set our fantasy points range at 0.1, not 0, purposefully, because we want to try to pull out all of the players from the player pool that are projected for 0. Okay? That's why that happens. Every player in the pool is in the Domination Station, but we don't want to look at them. We don't want them accidentally ending up in our lineups, so we set it up so that players projected at 0 are excluded. Now, let's say you want that player to be in your lineup. You're like, no, I want to use that guy. You can give them a projection, and they will become live. I don't want to do that because I don't want this guy in my pool, but you get the idea. Okay. Salary cap. This is a pretty interesting feature that we have where, as the user, you can actually reduce the total salary cap of your lineup below the total of 35,000. So let's say I want to go 34.9. Why would you want to do that? Why would you ever want to not spend your full cap? Well, it's to avoid ties for the most part. Certain sports where there are a ton of ties, there's some game theory sense to maybe setting it up this way so that none of your lineups are going to be a tie. The assumption being if I'm chasing a mass multi-entry tournament and I'd rather, give myself a shot for the win, not a tie score. It's pretty big in MMA and different sports. Not something I'd use for MLB. Okay, and finally, the main thing, or not finally, but you're going to set the number of lineups. So this is really important, and I'm going to get into this a little bit more as I talk about the stacks, but you have to understand the type of contest you're entering when you're setting up your distributions. I will attack a 20 entry contest completely differently than I would a 150 entry contest. With 20 entries, we really make a lot. We want to make some tough decisions, and we want to sort of go heavy on certain situations. That's how you win the tournament. You're not going to win the tournament by spreading it out so much that you don't have any massive exposure to any one situation. With 20 lineups, I'll probably, and when it comes to MLB, you'll stack a couple of teams. 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. We don't want to do a ton of teams. At 150 entries, if we're going to attack one of the 150 entry type contests, total different story. We need to be more unique. We need to get a little more uniqueness out of what we're doing. It's just a different approach to how we're going to set up our stacks. Again, with 20, with shorter numbers, we really don't want as many teams. Maybe 2 or 3 on either side. We'll get into that in a second. The final thing here is projections. We always use DFS Army points here. We have 2 projection systems. We have the DFS Army points, which is our internal projection, and we also have what we call projections, which are baseline projections that come from our data provider, and in essence, not something you should be using unless you absolutely need to. I leave them in there so I can compare. I like to see where we're a little bit different from the baseline. Finally, number of uniques per lineup. This setting is a setting that sets how many unique players from one lineup to the next, and it helps with diversification of your lineups and your player pool. The higher this number, the more players you will have in your player pool. Generally with MLB, I'll run at least 2 or 3 uniques. So there's the basics. We already knew all of this stuff. This has been the DFS Army MLB optimizer for years. Here's where it's changed. All right. Hitter stacking. Okay, a little button here. I'm going to press that. The first choice you're going to make is single or double stacks. Right? Single stack means just one team stacked and the rest of them one-offs. 2-offs, whatever, by projection. So we can run it like a single stack lineup, and then you can choose how many players you want in that stack. So let's say I want 4 player stacks, which is the max that you're allowed on Fanduel. DraftKings allows 5. But I could do 4 player stacks. And then again, we're running 50 lineups, so let's say I want to do 5 teams. So I'll do 20% Pittsburgh. Well, actually, I want to give you a little bit better way of how to do this. If you don't know and you're jumping on real quick, what you want to do is check out these numbers and target the teams with high numbers. I mean, it's not that hard. So I want Chicago, St. Louis, Colorado, Texas. Texas, the biggest one. Let's get Texas in there. Chicago, St. Louis, Colorado. And what else was projected high today? Let's go for Toronto. Minnesota also. So we'll keep them in mind. We'll go add team. Toronto, 20%. Okay, so let's start here. Basic, single, team, stack, second team, unstacked. We run it, 20 uniques, hit optimize. We're churning out lineups. Let's go. Clay Buchholz is the picture of the night. I hope he did well because that's who we liked, I guess, today. All right, so here we go. We're generating 50 lineups. Each one of these should have a 4-team stack in it. 1, 2, 3, 4. Texan. 1. Rangers. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 Rangers. Boom. Single stack lineups. Now notice some of these lineups will have 2 and 2 from other teams. Like you'll see, let's see, Minnesota, Minnesota. Angels, Angels. So this, although it's not set up for it, the projections themselves will cause other types of stacks going. So single stack is fine to run because in essence here you've got a 4-2-2 stack. Perfectly acceptable. Here we got, let's see, Rangers, 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 Minnesota, Minnesota, Washington. So we've got a 4-2 with 2 one-offs. Here we go. Rangers, 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 Minnesota, Minnesota. Another 4-2. Actually, this is a 4-2-2. Minnesota, 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 Washington, Washington, 4-2-2. Now that happened naturally. We didn't force the tool to create a second 2-2 stack. It just happened naturally based on the projections. Good way to run it. One of the cool things about running that way is there's a lot of uniqueness to it because most people are running 4-3 or 4-4 stacks. All right, so let's jump over and I'm going to explain how the double stack works because that's where it gets very interesting. The way we have this tool set up, we have stack A is considered the primary stack. Stack B, stack 2, stack 1 is the primary. Stack 2 is the secondary. What does that mean? The goal in stacking teams in MLB has always been to get a mix of all these different teams together because when the Mets go off for 24 runs, as they did this afternoon, and they set that record, I want to make sure that I have them stacked with like a bunch of other teams to catch the other team that went up today for 12 or 14 runs. And that's how you win the tournament. So you don't win the tournament by, putting out the optimal lineup every single time. What you do is you're mixing and matching teams, trying to catch those two teams and get them together in the same lineup. We will work that out. Is stack 1 is your primary, stack 2 is your secondary. What does this mean? It means that, let's say I have, let's start setting up stack 2, right? And I'm just going to go, who was that last team that I liked a lot? Toronto. All right. We've got Toronto's here. We're going to set Toronto over here as well. 10%. All right. Doesn't really matter. So I'm going to St. Louis, 20% add team. Washington, 20% add team. Minnesota, remember Minnesota was coming up a lot? They must have some good values today. 10% add team. See, 10, 30, 50, 60. We got to add up to 100% with these. So Detroit, 10%. 20, 40, 60, 70. All right, let's add one more team in for 30%. KC, 30%. Okay, here we go. So the way this is going to work, we're doing, let's call it 100 lineups so I can do the math real quick and easy in my head. Doing 100 lineups. That means 20 lineups for each of these teams. For each of these 20 lineups, 10% of them will be Toronto. Will be stacked with Toronto. 10%, 20% with St. Louis. That's with the Rangers. 20% with Washington. 20% with 10% with Minnesota. 10% with Detroit. 30% with Kansas City. So the actual numbers, because this is 20 lineups, 30% of 20 is 6. So 6 Texan stack, Ranger stack line. I did this last time. 6 Ranger stack lineups are going to include Kansas City, the Royals, right? 20% of 100 is 20. So 10% of that is 2. 2 Chicago Cubs lineups will have Toronto, right? So on and so forth. It's going to mix in each one of these primaries with all of the secondary teams in this percentage. In the end, we should have these percentages of all of these stacks. But the way it's going to mix them and match them together is how you set it as the user. I haven't even gotten to the crazy part yet, but let's just run this to get an example of what that looks like. Well, here we go. Again, Clay Buchholz is so well projected today that, he's popping up all over the place as the pitcher. That's fine. The rest of that, we're seeing all these various stacked teams. You might see 1 or 2 occasionally that become unstacked because the way the math kind of gets a little fuzzy at the end. But if you take a look, here you have it. Rangers, 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 Minnesota, Minnesota, Minnesota. 4-3 stack. Rangers, 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 Washington, Washington, Washington. You get your 4-3 stack. Now, here's one of the cool things. So initially when we put this together, we ran into a problem where if you had the Rangers on the left, primary, and the Rangers on the right, your secondary, it would just leave lineups unstacked. It would just skip them. 20%, hey, you can't stack the Rangers against the Rangers. Or just skip them. We've adjusted that, so right now what will happen is, even though this is set for 100%, it will if the tool sees the Rangers here and the Rangers there, it's just going to skip and it's just going to randomize those 20% or those 4 lineups. They'll still be stacked, but it's going to be stacked with other teams, not the Rangers. It's going to be stacked with other eligible teams that you as the user have set as eligible. Let's run it again. Again, all stacked lineups. You got the Rangers, 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 Twins, 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 right? All stacked lineups. Boom. Sometimes you'll have one that'll come, a 1 or 2 on a large run that'll have a 4-2-2 just because that, again, that last, sometimes the percentages don't perfectly work out and one will sneak by, but for the most part, they should all be stacked. Now, where you might get an unstacked lineup is, let's say we only filled out, we got 10, 30, 50, 60, 70. Let's say we removed the last team from this stack. So remove that 30%. In this case, you've only filled out 30, 50, 70%. The last 20% of lineups, or 30% of lineups, will be single stacks with just these teams. That's how it works. You've got to fill out 100% if you're going to have 100% exposures. Okay, next part of the tool. So you've already seen kind of how this all works. Now here's where it gets pretty interesting. If you don't want to use every player in a lineup, you don't have to. This is where it gets really cool. So I might say I want the Rangers, but there are, let's say there are only 6 players that I want on this team. Or, a certain number of them that I'm willing to use. Let's say there's a few I don't want to use, right? I don't like, Rogan Oder today, let's say, whatever. Or Robinson Krynos. I don't have to use him. You can set the players you want in each stack. Now, being careful to understand that if you leave too few players on both sides of these stacks, which is why I really don't recommend doing player names on both sides. I'd rather just do it on the primary side. The reason being, if you do too many of these on both sides, at some point you'll try to force the tool to make lineups where you don't have enough players. You need a first baseman, 3 outfielders, second, third, shortstop, catcher. What'll end up happening is if you do too many of these on both sides, you're going to end up with players, or it's going to try to make lineups that won't have enough players to fill every position. So be careful when using this. I really like to use it more of a, to pull 1 or 2 players out. Maybe, again, I don't like certain players. I might want all the lefties on one team, all the righties, but you don't want to be doing that all over the place because, again, you're going to constrain it to the point where it can't make lineups. But this is really an awesome feature. It's very unusual to be able to name the players that you're going to allow in stack. Really, most tools don't allow this. So this was the big innovation. It's something we've done already in football with our stacking feature where it's by name, not just by position. That's different than most other optimizer tools out there, I believe. And, this is the power of the control that we have to set the lineups the way that we want. Now, let's look at another possibility. Let's say you're not that into making a lot of choices, right? I don't want to make a lot of choices. I like to, keep it simple. Or you just want a bunch of random lineups, right? You don't want to make any choices. I want it to be easy. I've had some people ask about that. Okay, make it easy. You can do whatever you want. You can set these up 5%. You can just go through the list. You want every team to stack against every team? Or just do them, 5% is really low. You can go 10% each. Go in order, right? I don't want to make decisions. I'm just going to run a whole bunch of these out there. We got to count them up. We got only 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And we'll do 3 more. Where were we? Minnesota, Detroit. KC. Toronto, right? Now we could do the same on the other side. I really want to do every single team 10%. Okay. And just kind of basically throw a massive spread. This is something you might do only when you're making 150 lineups. So definitely don't do this for just one lineup. I mean, it would be ridiculous. But or for just 20 lineups. That doesn't work. You can't have this many teams for a small number of lineups. Texas, Washington, Atlanta. I'm just going to run this real quick to give an idea of how long this would take to set up like a crazy mix of just about every team. I don't recommend this method at all. I think it's too much spread. I think you need to make decisions when you make your lineups, but make sure I didn't double up anything. Okay. I must have repeated it. There it is. I knew I did something. Okay, there we go. Let's run it. Notice, it's just stacking like crazy. Rangers, 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 Rangers. Washington, Washington, Washington. Rangers, 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 Rangers. Oh, it's just changed on me. Rangers, 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 Rangers. Washington, Washington, Washington. Okay, so you're getting all these different stacks. Notice as it's working, these lineups are in order of the highest total projection. So as it's working, it's mixing, matching all these different teams, and you're getting a ton of mixed and matched lineups, and the top one that'll pop up obviously is the top projected. And isn't it interesting that the top projected lineup actually right now only spends 34.1 of the salary cap? Interesting. That's a 136.8 for 34, leaving $900 over. Interesting. Found an interesting combination, right? So I just want to test something. Let's say we just made an unstacked lineup. 1. I believe that number was 136. Oh, come on. I want to see if normally a single unstacked lineup will have a higher projection than anything. Yeah, 137.4. See, there it is. You almost found it without having to stack. 34.2 is the highest projected lineup. So today, in an odd twist, the actual highest projected lineup leaves a lot of salary on the table. That's interesting. That's just something I wanted to compare to the stacks. And actually, the total projection is very close to what I believe it was. All right, let's remember what this was. 137.474. Let's see what happens when we stack them. I'm just curious now, having a little fun. Enable the hitter stacking. There it is. Let's do 100. And again, let's remember that number. I expect that the stack lineup will be a little bit less because you can't quite match. But 137.474. Let's see if we can beat it. All right. Let's notice it starts 132. As it finds various different combinations, the highest one's popping in up top. Let's see if we can get that. Yeah, 35. We got to find that 34.2 again. Let's see if it comes up. I did single unique. Yeah, 137.0. So we got pretty close. Yeah, 137.0, and I think if we go back to 2 uniques as we had it originally, we might even get that other one. But there you have it. So this is the new stacking functionality for the Domination Station. Super excited. Again, user control is what we're all about. You can just make crazy stacks and kind of mix and match it like this. You can be very, very specific. If you have 3 teams that you love, generally this is an extreme way of running it, and I hope that is not kind of the takeaway from this. Normally the way you would run it, and I want to kind of give them more, because these were kind of outrageous stacks. The appropriate way to run this tool is, let's say you have 3 primary teams that you love this week. That's a little bit more of how this would work. So I'm going to look at the highest projection here. The Rangers, Minnesota, St. Louis, right? I love these three teams today. So we go Rangers, 35, Minnesota, 35, St. Louis, 30, right? Now you're going to say, well, I want a whole bunch of these other random teams mixed in, but I still want these three to mix with each other. So I'm going to go, you know, you have the Rangers, I'm going to go 20% on my same teams, right? 20% Minnesota, 20% Rangers. Let's add in St. Louis for 20%, right? That's 60. Then we're going to have a couple of one-offs. So, hey, okay, great. But let's get some more one-offs in here. So we got 60, 70, 80. Let's get two more teams in there. Add teams, which other teams are good? Again, we've got Toronto, we've got Colorado, and we've got Chicago. So we got Toronto, Colorado, and the Cubs, right? Boom. Quick check. 10, 20, 30, 50, 70, 80, 90, 100, 110. Oops, got to pull one out. Can only max out 100%. Okay, so what's happening here? We've got our three primaries. Now, they're going to mix and match with all of these teams, each one of them. Rangers, Twins, Cardinals, right? They're going to mix and match slowly. We're also going to make sure that we match up the Rangers with the Twins and the Cardinals. If you left these three teams on the left side on the stack 1 but didn't put them on stack 2, they will never face one another, and that's a problem. If we're assuming that these are our favorite three teams, we want them stacked against one another as well, which is why you have to make sure to use them on both sides of the stack rule. Let's run it. And there you have it. It's going to skip over situations where, like I said, as it's working right now, it's going to Rangers, right? So it's going Rangers against Pittsburgh, Rangers against Rangers. Oh, no, we can't do that. Skip that one. Rangers against Angels, Rangers against Twins, Toronto, Colorado, Pittsburgh. Oh, can't do that one. Skip. And it's just going to keep going and going and going, scrolling through, so that your final percentages aren't going to equal this perfectly, and that is how it has to be. It's impossible to get perfect math going, especially as you start to lower the number of lineups that you do. I mean, there's no actual, if you take 25% of 10 lineups, it's 2.5. Technically, that's not a real number. You need whole numbers. And so what we're doing is we're basically rounding that around, which means sometimes you'll ask for 25 and you'll get 30%. Sometimes you'll get 20% if you're doing a small number of lineups. So like here's a 20. Let's try a 20 lineup run. See, it'll work very differently. Yeah, Rangers, 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 Twins, Twins, Twins. There you go. So, and there may, like I said, you could get that one lineup that comes unstacked just because of the way the math works out. That will happen, so keep an eye out for that on occasion. But that really should only happen when you're doing small runs. But this is a 20 lineup run with a ton of teams. There was no way it could work out perfectly because obviously you can't do all of these percentages. We're talking about 30% of 20. 30% of 20, let's say if it was 30, was just 6 lineups, and you're asking for, 10% of 6, it's 0.6, 20% of 6 is 1.2. These numbers don't work out, so they're little bits. We're doing a little bit of rounding, and every once in a while you get your last one that won't be stacked, so you'll get a 4-2-2 or something like that with one lineup, which is fine too. Probably win the tournament with that one. So that's the basics of the new Domination Station stacking functionality. I hope I didn't blabber on too long here, but I wanted to fully explain how this works. This is a massive improvement, over what we've had, but over really what anybody has. You have a ton of control here. You can really set these up in the way that you want. It works wonderfully with our DFS Army coaching and Advice. You have DFS and Donuts putting out his mass multi-entry articles every single day. CG's got his stack articles coming out all the time. You got Matt with the pitching. Everybody's got a little bit of advice. We've got pitching advice. So you can really set this up how you want. And obviously, I didn't get too deep into this, but if you don't want 100% clay buckholes, you don't have to take 100%. You can set your max exposure 50%, and you're only going to get 50% clay. Here we go. Oh, some other pitcher popped up. There you go. So you want to spread out your player pool. The next way is to do it like that. Okay? We're going to look at every position, and if we're overly exposed to any one position. Okay, so Sano, 80%. That's way more than I ever want in any sort of MLB scenario. So I'm just going to reduce it. Let's go 40%. Okay, who else is too high? Oh, 55% Chew? I don't know about that. Let's lower him. Let's lower him down to 40%, right? So there we go. Run it again. We don't want to be overexposed to any one player. Let's check it out. Now we have too much Sano, okay? Too much snow. I don't want that much snow. Got to do a little shoveling with that much snow. Here we go. Boom. Let's run it again. This is how you set up your distribution. Okay, you don't want too much of any one player. Set a limit. Rogan Odor, 60%. Too much for me. This is how I make my lineups. I go through them one at a time. Set a projection. I use tournament mode for this. That's a whole nother story, but that's how I like to do it. And basically, nice even distribution of players, lots of players used, 20 lineups, win the tournament, make the money, DFS Army, kicking ass and taking names. If you're watching this and you're not a DFS Army current member, what are you thinking? Go to dfsarmy.com, get signed up as a VIP. You'll get in our Slack. You'll talk to the pros. You'll have access to these tools. This is just one of many. MLB Research Station. It's putting all the numbers together for you. Want to take it a step further? I didn't even talk about ownership projections. We're able to limit. You can look at these ownership projections. You want to win the tournament? It's all right. Cole Calhoun is going to be owned massively, right? Maybe we want to go underweight on Calhoun. Maybe we want to go overweight on Calhoun. He's the chalk. You know, make a decision. So, oh, he's chalk. I'm going to fade him. Here are all your high-owned players. Notice? They were the same players who were popping up a ton. You got Sano, Odor. I bet all these other guys are popping up a ton. Rendon. No. Let's see. Was he up there? Yeah, so maybe yeah, Washington, because I don't have the Washington stack. I mean, he's not going to pop up. But if you had Washington in there, he would pop up a ton. The point is, these are your high projected ownerships. You can work your tournaments by trying to stick with lower projected ownership players, but also remembering that these guys are projected to have high ownership for good reason. They must be in a great spot, which does make sense. If you look at the Army grade on Cole Calhoun, for example, it's very strong. He's got a massive points per dollar. Numbers to know even better. I mean, some of these guys are incredibly well projected, and you can see that that is the reason they will be highly owned today. So there you have it. Hopefully this explains everything. DFS Army members, obviously in Slack, hit us up with any questions, but I know you're going to love this. We're going to make even more money. As much ass as we've been kicking this NFL season, we're going to kick a little bit more ass now. Thanks, guys.